welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. Defense spending is skyrocketing in Japan. Now, a government expert panel has advised the Fumio Kishida government to raise money by taxing people or companies. Next, there's news that Iran has fortified uranium to 60% purity at one nuclear site. That brings it critically close to weapons-grade ability, the IAEA has said. And there's been yet another shooting in the United States as a gunman killed 5 in a Colorado club. We discuss the significant aspects of all these stories in today's show. A panel in Japan has recommended that Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's government raises taxes to pay for its big military spending push. Experts have advised against using government debt to get to the target of doubling the expenditure on arms. Should Japan convince businesses to cough up higher rates of tax, or will it burden ordinary people with more taxes? What explains the energized drive to build up its military? We talked to Anish from People's Dispatch, who has been tracking this issue. So Anish, a new national security plan for Japan. How much is it planning to spend on this?
Yeah, so it's a very ambitious project by the Kishida government. They're trying to update 3 crucial documents that pretty much outline the entirety of Japan's defense policy, but also a significant part of its foreign policy. So the crucial national security strategy, which pretty much outlines a 10-year plan for its defense and defense-related foreign policy matters. Apart from that, there is also the National Defense Program Guidelines, which deals with the functioning of the self-defense forces, and also the midterm defense program, which deals with the procurement of arms for the military. Now, these 3 documents usually will, when they're updated, they're done together. But the updating part this time is the more significant because the manner in which they're trying to update it, or the manner in which they're trying to change things that pretty much characterizes Japan's military setup right now. First of all, as you asked, they're trying to pretty much double the military budget. There was always this cap, a constitutionally mandated sort of cap of 1% of the GDP for military spending, which is the official military spending. There will be additional military spending that might come through other funds that can hike the spending as such, but it does not really affect the entirety, like the core of the spending itself. Then there is also the fact that they're trying to create something called as counterattack capabilities, which can be, or counteroffensive capabilities, which is the more contentious part. This is where the coalition, which the LDP has with Fumito, which is sort of fiscally conservative, but also a more peace-inclined, relatively speaking. We're talking about in extremely relative terms here, because we're talking about a right-wing government coalition, but a relatively more peace-inclined, or more, less militarily inclined party. So they are concerned about the counteroffensive strategy that Japan is the LDP government is trying to implement, by limiting the very definition of what an enemy state, what an attack would look like from an enemy state. Because what the LDP wants is a very general or a very expanded term and definition of what an attack would be, and that can actually become contentious in the international law, and that is where the Fumito is trying to raise issues with. The other part is obviously how they're going to raise the money. As you pointed out, the expert panel that they themselves set up, has asked for raising money through taxes. Now, who will be taxed is a big question, because obviously Fumito represents small business owners, small, housewives, and a whole host of other groups that pretty much do not fall between the worker capitalist binary. And the LDP pretty much has a great deal of interest and support and patronage from the capitalist class. So whether it will be done through corporate taxes or through income tax is something that we need to wait and see.
Right, Anish. Anish, but what's also the reason why Japan has decided to step up its military spending to this extent? What explains that?
Well, in many ways, it's kind of the rightward tilt that has begun since the Abe era, Japan, where they have been pretty much trying to push or undermine the sort of pacifist constitutional setup that Japan had already in place. Japan does not have, as a sovereign state, does not give itself the right to declare war. It also does not have an official military of its own. The Japan self-defense forces are pretty much sort of like a self-defense uh, extensively set up military setup, but a sort of a militarized police setup to serve sort of defense interests that the Japanese state might have. Now, in this case, since Abe, there has been attempts from the LDP with a more hawkish right-wing section within the LDP now gaining prominence and now being pretty much on the lead under Kishida, have been trying to do away with that pacifist part of the constitution, trying to give Japan the right to declare war unilaterally speaking, but also, include the Japanese self-defense forces as a full-fledged military. And that would in turn mean that you will also do away with all sorts of constitutional caps and limits on military spending. So there is this whole thing with Kishida trying to put 2027 as the timeline or time frame where he can at least achieve much of the military ambitions that he has put forward during the election season earlier this year, and through that, and the whole reason why they're trying to do is there will be obviously a party congress in China, the next party congress in China, which will be in 2027, which will also be marking the centennial of the People's Liberation Army. So there will obviously be military upgrades that will be different. There is also this sort of, alarmist date when they expect China to be the dominant power in Asia. So, sort of replacing Japan, a sort of problematic right-wing narrative, of course. But this hawkishness is pretty much the reason why it is happening, and this hawkishness coupled with pro-US interest in the region, which has gained quite strong with tensions heightening in the past year, more than a year actually now. This only becomes a bigger problem in the future.
Right, Anish, thanks for that update. Now, Anish, we're actually going to go to the United States, so stay with us for another minute or two. Iran has been enriching uranium at higher concentrations ever since the United States doubled down on sanctions. According to the nuclear watchdog IAEA, it has reached 60% purity at one plant in Fordo. Iran exceeded the levels agreed upon in 2015 as part of the JCPOA after the United States unilaterally exited the arrangement in 2018. Iran has been under a severe and escalating sanctions regime imposed by the US ever since then. Let's talk to Abdul from People's Dispatch about the significance of this development. So, Abdul, what does it mean when the IAEA says 60% enrichment?
Well, it depends. See, Iranians have already declared that they are not going to make nuclear weapons. They are not into creating nuclear weapons. So the percentage of Iranian enrichment is primarily for research academic purposes. There is no other use for it. And it is also used as a political kind of pressure tactics by the Iranians to basically pressurize the global community, in particular the United States and its European allies, to basically agree to what it has been pushing for in last few years about basically lifting of sanctions and revival of the basically JCPOA, so or the nuclear deal. So the higher the enrichment, of course, it basically creates a psychological pressure on countries such as US who are basically worried about Iran developing capacity to
Right.
build nuclear bomb. So it's basically, from the Iranian point of view, it has a diplomatic and a tactical use. From the US, it is basically a danger of Iranians basically acquiring the capacity of building nuclear weapons, and therefore that is the clash you can see. The IAEA basically is worried about the commitments. It does not trust, of course, it does not trust any country until there is a proper safeguard mechanism and it considers that they are following those mechanisms. So the higher the enrichment, and in particular in a situation where their inspectors are not on the ground monitoring the nuclear facilities where the enrichment is done, therefore it is a concern for the IAEA, of course.
So it's at about 90% where they say you've reached
Yes.
the weapons grade.
Yes.
Now, what about the JCPO itself, the nuclear treaty, which was so much in the news? What's happening with that?
Well, the US, which has the primary responsibility, has said that they are not. This is the deal. Revival of the deal is not a priority at this moment. That's what the US position is. It happened after the apparently a so-called final agreement was reached
Right.
a few months back, in which the US had agreed. Nothing was clear in the open. But the report said that US had agreed to lift the sanctions and the revival of the deal. But Iranians had objected over it, primarily because of the use of IAEA, what they called the political use of the IAEA. The IAEA has started investigation into an issue which Iranians consider an old issue, and they don't want that investigation to proceed. The matter is about finding of some man-made nuclear particles at some Iranian sites. Iranians claim that this issue is more than 15 years old, and this is prior to the JCPO agreements were reached in 2015. Hence, they have no relevance for the future of JCPO or the orientation of the Iranian nuclear program. But it seems that the US and its European allies are pushing the IAEA to basically investigate. And that's why the resolution last week was passed by the IAEA demanding Iranians to cooperate further.
Right.
But Iranians don't want to do it, and that is where the current situation is. But that is not the real reason behind the not revival of the nuclear deal. It is primarily the US reluctance to basically lift the sanctions at this moment for various political and geopolitical reasons.
All right, Abdul. Thanks a lot for joining us with that update. A shooting at a gay club in Colorado in the United States has ended in 5 deaths and it has left 17 people injured. It's the latest crime in the country that has seen repeated fatal shootings. The shooter was a 22-year-old, but even as there's shock and sorrow over the incident, the big questions about gun control in the United States remain unanswered. We return to Anish for more about this incident. Okay, Anish, welcome back. Now, Anish, there's been a shooting in Colorado. Can you tell us what we know so far about the attack itself?
Well, it has been another sort of tragic mass shooting that has happened in a long list of mass shootings over the past decade now, which we have all seen and all witnessed around the world, actually. Now, in this case, at least, there has been, the motive is not very clear because the suspect is not speaking to the police or not even giving any details of why he did what he did. The background of the suspect, from what we understand right now, shows that he definitely grew up in a very troubled home, and that may or may not have influenced him. But what is more important is the fact that he was somebody who has a history of being charged with a felony. A year and a half before the shooting, he actually threatened his mother with a bomb, and with other sorts of firearms that were never procured by the police. And these factors have definitely raised questions about, first of all, because the motive is not liking, there is definitely a section within the LGBTQ community of how much the toxic sort of disinformation campaign that has grown against the LGBT community, especially the trans community and the genderqueer community, has grown over the past several years now, with the alt-right, the right wing, and the new sort of Trumpist right have taken to maligning the entire movement, with statements like grooming and stuff like that happening, with myths being created of those sorts, and of sort of other sorts of disinformation that has already put them under significant legal and legislative attacks in different Republican states, including Colorado itself. But there is also the other factor of how gun laws really, like, it is high time that the United States as a whole takes a relook at its gun laws, of how it controls firearm possession in its own territory.
Ish, it's almost like every time there's a shootout, there's a discussion on gun laws, but nothing happens. Can you just give us a sort of quick update on where the discussion stands right now?
It's difficult to say because, first of all, we're talking about a very strongly Republican state and a city as well, a very conservative city. And obviously, that is pretty much also something that has affected the manner in which the suspect has been treated. Now, one of the things that Colorado does have is what is called as the red flags procedure, which is pretty much gives the state or the courts and the police the right to procure and seize any kind of firearms that any suspect of any sort of violent crimes might have, including firearms or weapons that they would deem to be harmful to the suspect themselves and people around them. Now, the case of the suspect with the previous bomb scare that he created at his mother's home, it pretty much shows that this person falls definitely within that category, but nothing of that sort was done by the state. His mother definitely talked about him possessing firearms. We do not know how different things would have turned out to be if the said laws were put in place, or how much it would have slowed down the suspect's actions to begin with. But the fact remains that Colorado does not implement a whole host of its own set of gun laws, very basic gun laws that does require definitely different sort of court procedures, but very basic stuff like taking away possessions of firearms from people who are a threat to themselves or others. And simple things like that has not been implemented in the county that we are talking about, the El Paso County. There has been just 13 such attempts to seize firearms, only three of which included a long-term, 3 or 4 if I'm not wrong, included long-term seizure of these firearms. Now, that shows that, and this is considering the fact that firearm-related crimes are on a high in the recent years, not just in the county or the state, but across the United States. So, the fact that these laws, that as they exist, are not being implemented, definitely coming with a political bias of the dominant parties in place, shows that things have to go a long way than just passing a couple of laws. There needs to be structures and systems in place that make sure even the existing ones are actually implemented on the ground and not just ignored when time requires it.
And that's all we have for today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back to us tomorrow. You can find more such stories on our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and look out for our regular updates on our social media channels.